Welcome, students of my first period class. Welcome to my dungeon, my garage, here at my house, where many of my best memories and best lives have been made. I'm sorry I can't be with you this morning, but I wanted to speak with you on our nutrition education we've been working through the last 8 weeks, and today we're going to be speaking about nutrient timing. Over the last 2 weeks, we've covered a series of nutrition topics, including the Renaissance periodization chart, which puts the foundations in the biggest portion, and it works its way up to the least important considerations for the average athlete. So we're going to be talking about timing today. Last week, we talked about calories. Are you eating enough energy? Eating enough energy is one of the most basic components of nutrition. Are you eating too much? Are you eating too little? These items we discussed in great depth. This is the Renaissance periodization chart, as we discussed last week. Calories. Then we discussed, are you eating the right balance of macronutrients? Are you eating enough proteins, carbohydrates, and fats? We gave examples of each. Today we'll be talking about that green layer in the middle, the third most important consideration as we get higher and closer to the top of our pyramid, which is timing. And we're going to do it in 3 sections. The first section is going to be pre-training or pre-competition. Then the next section will be interim or during the competition or practice or training. And then we'll discuss items that should be eaten afterwards and why it's important to eat them quickly. So we're going to discuss those items as we go. So during competition, or pre-competition, we want to be eating foods that are high in certain nutrients. The first one that I tell people that needs to be rich in carbohydrates. Remember, carbohydrates are our body's favorite use of fuel. An item, for example, of a carbohydrate might be something like oats. For those of you that have morning training, you could have some oatmeal. It would be a whole grain item. As it gets into the mouth, salivary amylase starts to break down carbohydrates, and as it gets into the stomach and intestinal tract particularly, the intestinal tract has the fuel and the enzymes to start breaking this down and making it available. Sometimes, because our training is coming up very quickly, we might need a more refined carbohydrate or more quickly absorbed carbohydrate. And so I have a few items here. You could do something like a fruit juice, which has got lots of calories in the form of carbohydrates and can be absorbed very quickly because it's in liquid form. We got some of y'all's kid favorites, something like this. This is a Pop-Tart. It's very refined. So the flour used in the Pop-Tart is a refined carbohydrate, so it's very quickly absorbed. I've hit multiple PRs in the early morning after eating 1 or 2 of these. And then, of course, there's some carbohydrates that have certain items in them that I find particularly helpful. So, though this may be a grotesque example of a practice or pre-game carbohydrate, is very high in sodium or salt, which of course you lose lots of when you sweat. So if you're a heavy sweater like me, you're going to want to increase your sodium content in your foods. Now typically early in the morning, if I'm training early in the morning, I have eggs and I pre-salt it with white iodized salt, and so that salt's already added. I sometimes have bacon, and bacon is high in sodium. So I typically have a decent amount of sodium with my breakfast. But I always recommend athletes give an afternoon practice where you have 2-a-days. Try to find a way to get in a secondary carbohydrate that's high in sodium. All right, so we've talked a little bit about pre-competition. We're trying to stack the body with readily usable energy. So that's why I tend to push athletes toward carbohydrates. You could use some healthier options than Doritos, of course, like an apple. An apple, we get a carbohydrate source, but remember, the apple is fibrous. The peel And the element that keeps the apple rigid is fiber. Fiber makes absorption a little slower. So if you're going to eat an apple, it may not be absorbed as quickly. But if you take it 30 minutes plus before a game, there's plenty of time for the apple to go into the stomach and move into the small intestines for absorption of glucose and fructose. With that being said, when you eat an entire meal, that meal should be eaten about 4 hours before competition. The more you train and the more experienced you are with eating food and then running or lifting or competing, I like to tell people, inch that meal a little closer. I'd like to have a pre-game meal about 3 or 2.5 hours before competition. I actually kind of want to feel a little bit of energy still in my intestinal tract, inside my stomach, still clicking and popping and pulling in nutrients. Some people say, oh, I can't do that. I get an upset stomach if I feel any food in my stomach. Well, then you need to practice eating that meal 4, maybe even 5 hours before competition, and then slowly start inching closer towards your performance. If you're competing regularly, then you can practice eating for competition regularly. So this is one of those things that you just trial and error. Over time, you learn what works for pre-competition nutrition and what doesn't for you. The earlier you learn it, the more bumps and bruises you'll avoid in the nutrition department. Okay, so we've talked about pre-competition. I'm going to give you a couple of different scenarios and help you out. If you're an athlete that's competing in a game late at night, then you may have had 3 to 8, maybe even 4 meals before that competition, where the food's been pushed into your muscle and absorbed through your digestive tract all day long. Some athletes will be competing early in the morning, and their competition is so bright and early, it would be difficult to wake up and eat an entire meal with a substantial caloric value before their competition. So for those athletes, you need to make sure that you're timing your biggest meals the night before. Sometimes people call this carbohydrate loading, and athletes will go out and get some spaghetti or some pasta or some pizza or something like that, something that's rich in carbohydrates the night before. That way when they wake up at 5 in the morning or 4:30 in the morning, and they get their shoes laced up and their equipment on, and they play that 6 a.m. game or that 7 a.m. race start time, they have the nutrients already in their body. Don't forget that you always dehydrate overnight because you're breathing and losing water slowly. So if you are competing in the morning, you want to make sure that you were well hydrated the night before and that you prioritize water in the morning. This is something I recommend to athletes. Hey, have that Powerade or Gatorade in the morning when you wake up if you're if your goal is to be competing or training within an hour. Start bringing your blood sugar up. Start bringing your liquids and your hydration up early in the morning. All right, so we've talked about pre-competition nutrition. Let's talk about during or interim. So this is the part of the game. It's halftime. What do I eat? I've already trained for 30 minutes. I've got another 30 minutes to an hour of training. What are some things that I can eat? It's important to know that at this point, your body is still pulling in carbohydrates. It still needs carbohydrates that are readily available. And the brain prefers or will only work off of glucose. So the thinking and the moving combined was going to put a high demand on your glucose intake. Try to have things that are really easy to digest. So things like applesauce. Sometimes there's like carbohydrate goos you can buy. Gummies. This is super popular in the weightlifting and powerlifting world. Having like simple candy that they enjoy eating in between their lifts or in between their sets to keep their blood sugar up. If you're racing a long distance race, it was not uncommon for people in the triathlon and marathon world to drink flat Coke during their races because the Coke has caffeine as a little stimulant and it's got quickly absorbable sugar, which is what they're immediately burning off as they race. So I tend to try to encourage athletes to stay to liquid form, but if your training lasts more than an hour or an hour and a half, your body doesn't store glucose that well. So you may need to have a hardened source A Pop-Tart could work. I always encourage people to have like a refined carbohydrate, like crackers and maybe even peanut butter, because those are something that's simple. Pretzels are salty. That'll help bring your sodium levels up at the same time. So those are some ideas that I've had athletes use and work. Nothing wrong with having some cut up clementines or oranges, but remember, fiber slows down absorption. So if it's a whole lot of fiber in the intake, it may slow down your absorption of the nutrient. All right, now let's talk about post-exercise nutrition. Okay, after exercise, you are going to need to recover. Not only do you need to replace the very low glucose levels from running your marathon or playing that two matches of soccer, you're going to need to bring your glucose back up, or your carbohydrates. But you're also going to need to start adding in some materials that are going to repair. We talked about that being protein. So we want to start taking in protein after our competitions. Now, this may seem silly, but you could go down to the local burger shop, get a bun, which is carbohydrates, a ground beef patty, which is protein, add in some vegetables and some sauces, and all of a sudden you've got a little recipe for recovery. The most important nutrient in your recovery is going to be a high quality protein, because the body will transform protein into carbohydrates if it has to, but it cannot take carbohydrates and repair tissue. So we want to make sure we're layering in a post-workout carbohydrate. And I've got one over here that I use most regularly. You can't tell so well here, but this is a bunch of frozen top sirloin steak. Steak is a very high quality protein. It's very, very high in heme iron. It's very high in vitamin B6 and vitamin B12. It's very bioavailable. It has a very high quality protein, and it's easy to cook. You throw it on the grill or in the pan, and in 5 to 10 minutes, you've got a cheap, effective, low fat content food item. Now remember, ribeyes, New York strips, some of these other steak items can have a high fat content or marbling, but top sirloin has a leaner content. So I get a lean top sirloin. If it looks bright red, that's good. If it has a lot of white, try to get a leaner version of that. White is the fat that's held within the muscle, or intramuscular fat, so we want to avoid that. But steak is delicious. My kids and I eat it after workouts all the time, and we find that that's a super high quality recovery tool. If you've been a student in our school for long enough, we know that we have a high quality protein on site that the athletes can eat or drink right after training. So if you've seen these in the fridge, yes, we've got a carbohydrate content that's going to replace carbohydrates from the workout, but it's also going to have a high quality protein, animal product protein, that can help you recover. I use eggs as a simple recovery tool. Eggs are almost liquid form, right? So you crack it open and it's got this gelatinous yellow yolk in the middle. It's got this clear whitish substance around it. I crack it into my drinks. I'll throw it into a frying pan, and I'll try to make the most of my recovery by eating eggs. If I have a morning workout, I eat the eggs right away because, hey, it's quickly absorbed and it's high in nutrients. It's super high in vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin D. It's just got a really, really high quality protein. So if you're not sure what to eat in the morning, I highly encourage add eggs as often as possible. I haven't missed having eggs in years. I have eggs every morning for breakfast. So that's one of those elements I really encourage. Have a high quality protein. Okay, so quick review. We talked about pre-workout or pre-practice, pre-competition. High carbohydrate, 4 hours before if it's a meal, 1 to 2 hours before if it's liquid form. Refined carbohydrates are more quickly absorbed, so use those as often as possible right before competition. But if you can put together a more complex meal, give yourself that 4-hour gap so that you have plenty of time to get the nutrition digested and into the small intestines, out of your stomach. Okay, interim. You want to keep it almost all liquid form. If you have to eat food during training or during competition, make sure it has some other element of nutrition in it. A pretzel also has salt. Gatorade has electrolytes as well. So you want to make sure that there's some sort of extra nutrient you can get in there. If you have the orange slices, it's got extra vitamin C. Okay? Mostly liquid form though is going to help you. Gatorade, Powerade are something I really encourage people to have on hand for all training, including competition games. Okay, post-workout. Go ahead and have that powdered protein shake if you have it. But if you can, stick to real food. You're a young person, you're an athlete. Learn how to have real food at the right time is important. Have a burger after a competition. I love to have the top sirloin steak sliced up and diced up and some ramen noodles. I even crack an egg into the noodles, mix it up in there, and now I'm maximizing on my noodle game. I'm eating the proteins and the eggs with it. So those are my three areas we're going to talk about today in timing. Timing is how you're going to eat and prepare for competition, how you're going to stay fueled during competition, and timing is what you're going to eat after competition to recover and prepare yourself for the next practice, training, or game. All right, Warriors, I hope you have a great day. I miss you guys. Sorry I couldn't be there today, but let's make the most of it. All right, walk her out. See you guys.